welcome to Finextra TV. I'm Hannah Wallace, and kindly joining me now is Sanat Rao, Chief Business Officer and Global Head at Infosys Finacle, and we're talking about scaling digital transformation and the future of transactional banking. Hello Sanat, it's good to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Hannah.
I think a good place to start with is talking about some of the challenges you're seeing around transactional banking, particularly from a macroeconomic point of view.
Sure. And I think given the kind of environment we are operating in today, it's not a surprise that there are multiple factors at play when you look at macroeconomic trends. And if I were to sort of just focus on a handful of them, first is given the kind of interest rate regime that corporates are operating in today, it's not a surprise that the demand for commercial and industrial loans has been sluggish. Banks are having to work that much harder, indeed corporates are having to work that much harder for profitability. And the task has not been made any easier by the fact that low-cost digital platforms, fintechs, and new forms of competition are there in the market. And there are a lot of banks that are offering that choice through very, very competitive services. So I think banks are recognizing today that the loyalty of a corporate customer cannot be taken for granted. And that, if anything, is going to make it even more difficult for them to survive and do business profitably in the current environment.
All right, you certainly set the scene for us there. And of course, we've got Sibos fast approaching. This year it's set to be in London, which is really exciting for us as well. But what do you think are going to be some of the priorities being spoken about at the event that are shaping transactional banking?
I think there are obviously multiple priorities, but if you look at a handful of them, first and foremost, I think, is the whole idea of putting the power and the capability of the service in the hands of the corporate customer. Many times when we look at the concept of self-service, we believe it's for you and me as individuals. You know, we can do banking in whichever device we want, wherever we are. I think that requirement is very much there for the corporate customers as well. So self-service certainly is number one. The second aspect, I think, is that transaction banking by definition, and certainly many large and medium corporates today operate across geographies. And therefore, I think banks are being really hard-pressed to bring about a certain degree of standardization in the way they operate in different geographies. So if there's a corporate customer operating with a bank in Johannesburg or New York or Hong Kong, they should be able to feel the same level of service no matter where they're operating. And I think banks are recognizing that in their quest to digitize their core, there is a compelling need to bring about a standardization of service. And I think banks are going to place a lot of focus on that. The last element I'd say is this whole issue about the speed of aggregation of services. In the past, we used to believe that an open and a strong ERP system would facilitate that. I think in the current environment, and given what the power of technology has to offer today, it really goes beyond that. We are today operating in an API economy, and the leveraging of APIs, but complementing that with strong API aggregation mechanisms, I think is going to make not just the aggregation become more efficient, but it's going to become a lot more speedy. And I think that's what corporate wants. So I think this is going to be one priority that increasingly banks are going to look at.
Well, following on from that quite nicely then, what do you think is the most pressing business issue for bankers with regards to digitizing the corporate sector?
Banks are going to find ways to ensure that the concepts and principles of open banking are available to the corporate treasurer as well, so that they can leverage the ecosystem, they can leverage the ability to be able to tap into capabilities which reside outside their own infrastructure, to be able to comply with regulation on the one hand, but to be able to offer business services very efficiently. I think the second point, more from a business perspective, is related to what I mentioned previously, which is that when banks deal with their corporate clients, a lot of their corporate clients today are operating across geographies. And they're having to source material, they're having to source supplies and services from different players in the ecosystem. And therefore, this whole element of making supply chain financing strong and efficient, I think is going to receive a lot more attention going forward than it has in the past. And this is not a fact that's necessarily receiving as much attention as it ought to. But I do believe that supply chain financing and bringing about a lot of efficiency in that is going to get a lot of attention in the days forward.
All right, but what about collaboration? Where does this fit in? It's also going to be a really big topic at Sibos. What collaboration are you seeing also between the fintechs and the corporates?
Before I talk about the nature of collaboration itself, I think there are lots of examples today where entities compete with one another in certain areas but collaborate in the others, right? And therefore, I think gone are the days where you looked at a competitor only as a competitor. So collaboration today is not just with the fintechs. I think we are seeing consortiums, we are seeing capabilities coming to the table where banking institutions are coming together to collaborate and to form and offer capabilities and services. One example that comes to mind immediately is an offering that we launched with 14 banks to offer trade finance capabilities on a blockchain network. And these 14 banks came together. They're competitors in every other space that they do, but as far as leveraging trade finance on a blockchain platform is concerned, they came together to look at how blockchain can facilitate the ease of exchange of documents between them, all with the intent of making the trade finance processes more efficient, which ultimately had benefits for their end customers, which are the corporates. So I think there are lots of examples today where banks are looking at other banks as collaborators rather than just competitors. I think historically this is an area that has not received the kind of investment, certainly as far as technology is concerned, amongst many banks. And I think banks are recognizing that, and certainly we at Finacle are doing a lot of work with banks in the transaction banking space, both as far as the back-end systems are concerned as also on the digital side. So I think there's going to be a lot of excitement there. And I think the corporates are ready for that, because if a bank is going to provide them the right kind of service in the most efficient manner, I think corporates are going to recognize that they can really do a lot of good transaction business across the globe.
Certainly some exciting developments ahead then. Sanat, thank you very much for sharing insights, and we look forward to seeing you at Sibos. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah.